3 years ago, I received a phone call that changed everything. The oncologist's voice was steady, professional, but the words hit like a sledgehammer. Stage 3 melanoma. Aggressive. Spreading. While I sat in that sterile hospital room processing the reality that I might not see my next birthday, my family was planning their annual Caribbean cruise. What happened next would tear apart everything I thought I knew about the people I call family, and lead to a $6.2 million settlement they'll never see a penny of. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Rachel, and until March 15, 2021, I thought I had a pretty ordinary life. I was 34, working as a regional marketing manager for a tech startup in Portland, Oregon. Single, no kids, but close with my family, or so I believed. My parents, Dorothy and Frank Martinez, lived in the same suburb where I grew up. My older brother Kevin ran a successful landscaping business, and my younger sister Amanda had just finished her master's degree in education. The Martinez family had always been tight-knit, at least on the surface. Sunday dinners at Mom and Dad's house were sacred. We celebrated every holiday together, shared inside jokes, and I genuinely thought we had each other's backs through thick and thin. I was the responsible middle child, the one who helped Dad with his taxes, drove Mom to her doctor appointments, and bailed Kevin out when his business hit rough patches. The mole appeared on my left shoulder blade sometime in late 2020. At first, I didn't think much of it. I'd always been careful about sun protection. But like many people, I figured a small, irregularly shaped mark was just part of getting older. It wasn't until my friend Sarah, a nurse at Oregon Health Sciences University, noticed it during a weekend trip to the coast, that I started to worry. "Rachel, when did this show up?" she asked, her voice carrying a concern that made my stomach drop. "I don't know, maybe 6 months ago? It's just a mole." Sarah's expression was serious. "This doesn't look like just a mole. The edges are irregular, and it's got multiple colors. You need to see a dermatologist immediately." That conversation happened on a Saturday in February. By Monday morning, I was on the phone trying to get an appointment. The earliest available slot was 3 weeks away, but Sarah knew someone who could see me sooner. Dr. Patricia Hoffman at Portland Dermatology Associates agreed to work with me on Thursday. The appointment itself was quick but thorough. Dr. Hoffman examined the mole with a dermatoscope, her face growing more serious with each passing second. She measured it, took photographs, and asked detailed questions about my family history of skin cancer, sun exposure, and when I first noticed changes. "I'm going to do a biopsy today," she said, her tone professional but gentle. "The characteristics I'm seeing here are concerning. We'll have results back within a week." The biopsy was uncomfortable, but not painful. A small punch of tissue removed, the area numbed and bandaged. Dr. Hoffman explained that they'd call with results, and if anything came back abnormal, we'd discuss next steps immediately. That week was the longest of my life up to that point. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office, taking on extra projects, anything to keep my mind occupied. I didn't mention the biopsy to my family. Looking back, maybe I should have, but I didn't want to worry anyone over what might turn out to be nothing. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in a marketing strategy meeting. My phone buzzed with Dr. Hoffman's office number, and I excused myself to take it in the hallway. "Rachel, this is Dr. Hoffman. I need you to come in tomorrow morning to discuss your biopsy results. Can you be here at 9 a.m.? The tone told me everything I needed to know. Good news gets delivered over the phone. Bad news requires a face-to-face conversation. I barely slept that night. I researched melanoma statistics until 3 a.m., falling down internet rabbit holes about survival rates and treatment options. By the time I arrived at Dr. Hoffman's office the next morning, I was exhausted and terrified. "The biopsy confirmed my suspicions," Dr. Hoffman said, sliding a folder across her desk. "You have melanoma. The good news is we caught it relatively early, but we need to move quickly." She explained that the melanoma was 2.8 millimeters thick, what they call a Breslow depth, which classified it as intermediate thickness. More concerning was the presence of ulceration, which increased the risk of the cancer spreading. I needed immediate wide excision surgery to remove more tissue around the original site, followed by a sentinel lymph node biopsy to determine if the cancer had spread to my lymph nodes. The surgery was scheduled for the following Monday. Dr. Hoffman referred me to Dr. Michael Chen, a surgical oncologist at OHSU, who would perform the procedure. She also connected me with an oncology team in case further treatment was needed after the pathology results came back. Walking out of that appointment, I felt like I was moving through thick fog. The world looked the same, but everything had fundamentally changed. I was facing cancer at 34, and the next few weeks would determine whether I was looking at months of treatment or years of uncertainty. That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at the informational packets Dr. Hoffman had given me. Melanoma staging guidelines, post-surgical care instructions, contact numbers for support groups. The reality was sinking in. This was serious, and I was going to need support. I decided to call my family that night. Mom answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. "Hi, honey, how was your day?" "Mom, I need to tell you something important. I just came from the doctor, and I've been diagnosed with melanoma. It's skin cancer, and I'm having surgery next Monday." There was a pause. Not the shocked silence I expected, but something more distracted. "Oh, that's terrible, sweetheart." "Skin cancer, you said?" "Well, they can fix that nowadays, can't they?" "Listen, I'm actually in the middle of something right now. Your father and I are meeting with the travel agent about our cruise next month. Can I call you back later?" I sat there holding the phone, stunned. "Mom, this is serious. It's not just a minor procedure. I might need chemotherapy or—" "Of course, dear. We'll talk about it later. I really do need to run. Love you." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. My mother had essentially dismissed my cancer diagnosis to discuss vacation plans. I called Kevin next. He was driving home from a job site, and I could hear his truck radio in the background. "Hey sis, what's up?" "Kevin, I just found out I have melanoma. I'm having surgery on Monday to remove it and see if it's spread." "Melanoma? That's skin cancer, right? Damn, that sucks. But you're young and healthy, you'll beat it no problem." "It's not that simple. Depending on what they find during surgery, I might need months of treatment. I'm scared." "Look, Rachel, I get that you're worried, but you're being dramatic. People get skin cancer all the time and they're fine. My buddy Jake had some skin thing removed last year and he was back to work the next day. You'll be fine. This isn't just some skin thing, Kevin. This is serious cancer." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. Okay, look, I'm pulling into my driveway and Lisa's making dinner. Can we talk about this later, maybe this weekend? Another dismissal. I hung up feeling more isolated than before I'd made the call. Amanda was my last hope. We'd always been close despite the age gap, and she was usually more emotionally attuned than Kevin. I texted her first. "Can you talk? Something important." She called back within minutes. "What's going on?" "I got some bad news today. I've been diagnosed with melanoma, and I need surgery next week. I'm really scared." "Oh my God, Rachel, are you okay? Wait, actually, can you hold on 1 second? Mike is trying to tell me something about dinner plans." I heard muffled conversation in the background, then Amanda came back on the line. "Sorry, we're trying to figure out reservations for tomorrow night. So you said melanoma? That's definitely scary. But skin cancer is really treatable now, right? I mean, you hear about people getting little spots removed all the time." "This isn't a little spot, Amanda. It's an aggressive melanoma. I might need chemotherapy." "But you caught it early, right? That's what matters." "Listen, I'm really sorry this is happening, but I actually have to go. Mike and I are meeting his parents for dinner, and we're already running late. Can we talk more this weekend?" 3 family members, 3 conversations, 3 dismissals. Each person minimized my diagnosis, cut the conversation short, and promised to talk later. None of them asked about my surgery date, whether I needed help, or how I was emotionally handling the news. That night, I cried harder than I had since childhood. Not just from fear about the cancer, but from the crushing realization that the people I thought would support me through the worst crisis of my life couldn't even spare 10 minutes for a phone conversation. The next few days passed in a blur of medical appointments and pre-surgical preparations. I met with Dr. Chen, who explained the wide excision procedure and sentinel lymph node biopsy in detail. The surgery would take about 2 hours, and I'd need someone to drive me home afterward. Recovery would involve limited arm movement for several days while the incision healed. I realized I needed to ask someone to help me after surgery. My first instinct was to call my family, but the memory of those dismissive phone conversations made me hesitate. Instead, I reached out to Sarah, who immediately offered to take the day off to drive me to and from the hospital. "Are you kidding me?" she said when I explained the situation. "Of course I'll be there. What about your family?" I told her about the phone calls, and her reaction was immediate and furious. "Are you serious? They all blew you off? Rachel, this is major surgery for cancer. What is wrong with them? I don't know. Maybe they're just scared and don't know how to process it. That's not an excuse. You need support right now, not people minimizing what you're going through. Sarah's anger on my behalf was both validating and heartbreaking. It confirmed that my family's response wasn't normal or acceptable, but it also highlighted how alone I was in this fight. The Sunday before surgery, I decided to try reaching out to my family one more time. I sent a group text to Mom, Dad, Kevin, and Amanda. Surgery is tomorrow at 7 a.m. at OHSU. If anyone wants to be there or needs updates, let me know. The responses were swift and devastating. Mom, good luck, sweetie. Dad and I are leaving for the cruise early tomorrow morning. I'm sure everything will go perfectly. Kevin, you got this. I've got 3 big jobs this week, so I'll be swamped, but thinking of you. Amanda, sending good vibes. Mike and I are driving to Seattle tomorrow for his brother's engagement party. Call me when you're feeling better. Not one of them offered to postpone their plans. Not one asked if I needed anything. Not one seemed to grasp that I was having major cancer surgery and would be facing potentially life-changing news about whether the disease had spread. I turned off my phone and spent the evening meal prepping easy foods for my recovery, laying out comfortable clothes, and trying to mentally prepare for whatever the next day would bring. Sarah had offered to stay with me for the first night after surgery, and I was grateful beyond words to have at least one person who understood the seriousness of what I was facing. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision that would define everything that came after. My family had shown me exactly where I stood in their priorities, and I would remember this moment for the rest of my life, however long that might be. I had no idea that within 18 months I'd be facing a multi-million-dollar settlement that would test every relationship in my life. But in that moment, lying alone in the dark before cancer surgery, I learned the most important lesson of my adult life. When a crisis reveals people's true character, believe what they show you the first time. The alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. on March 22, 2021. I'd barely slept, but adrenaline kicked in immediately. Sarah arrived at 5:15 with coffee and a reassuring smile that didn't quite hide her own nervousness. "Ready for this?" she asked, though we both knew ready wasn't really possible. The drive to Oregon Health Sciences University took 20 minutes through empty Portland streets. The city looked different in the pre-dawn darkness, cleaner somehow, like the world had been washed while everyone slept. Sarah filled the silence with gentle chatter about her weekend plans, carefully avoiding any mention of what we were actually driving toward. OHSU's Kohler Pavilion was already bustling with activity despite the early hour. The registration process was efficient but cold. Insurance cards, consent forms, medical history verification. A nurse named Janet led me to the preoperative area, where I changed into a hospital gown and settled into a narrow bed surrounded by curtains. Dr. Chen appeared at 6:30, looking remarkably alert for someone who'd probably been up since 4 a.m. He reviewed the surgical plan one more time. Wide excision around the melanoma site, removing a margin of healthy tissue to ensure clear borders, followed by the sentinel lymph node biopsy to determine if cancer cells had traveled to my lymph nodes. The wide excision should take about 45 minutes, he explained, marking the surgical site with a purple pen. The lymph node biopsy adds another hour. We'll inject a radioactive tracer and blue dye to identify the sentinel nodes, the first lymph nodes that drainage from the melanoma site reaches. If those nodes are clear, we can be confident the cancer hasn't spread. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Rebecca Torres, introduced herself and explained the process. General anesthesia, intubation, complete unconsciousness throughout the procedure. She asked about my medical history, allergies, and previous surgeries. Standard questions, but each one felt weighted with the gravity of what was happening. Sarah squeezed my hand as they prepared to wheel me to the operating room. "I'll be right here when you wake up," she promised. "Your family doesn't know what they're missing." The last thing I remembered was the anesthesia mask covering my face and Dr. Torres's voice telling me to count backward from 10. I made it to 7. Waking up was like swimming through thick honey. Voices drifted in and out of focus, monitors beeped steadily, and everything felt heavy and distant. The recovery room was bright and sterile, staffed by nurses who moved with practiced efficiency between patients emerging from surgery. My left shoulder throbbed with deep, aching pain that the morphine dulled but couldn't eliminate entirely. Thick bandages covered the surgical site, and my arm was secured in a sling to prevent movement that might stress the incision. Dr. Chen appeared beside my bed around 11 a.m., still wearing scrubs but looking satisfied. The surgery went very well, he said, pulling up a chair. We removed a significant margin of tissue around the melanoma site, about 2 centimeters in all directions. The wide excision looks clean, but we'll have pathology results in 3 to 5 days to confirm clear margins. He paused, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. The sentinel lymph node biopsy was more complicated. We identified 3 sentinel nodes and removed them for analysis. One of them felt firmer than I'd like during the procedure, which could indicate cancer involvement. We won't know for certain until pathology examines them under a microscope. The implications hit me immediately. If cancer had reached my lymph nodes, my diagnosis would be upgraded to stage 3 melanoma, requiring months of immunotherapy treatment with no guarantee of success. What are the odds? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. With melanoma of your depth and the presence of ulceration, there's about a 30% chance of lymph node involvement. If the nodes are positive, we'll need to discuss further treatment options with your oncology team, 30%, nearly 1 in 3. Those weren't odds I wanted to gamble with, but the dice had already been thrown. Sarah helped me get dressed and drove me home, stopping at a pharmacy to fill prescriptions for pain medication and antibiotics. My apartment felt strange and unfamiliar, like I was visiting someone else's life. The simple act of changing into comfortable clothes was exhausting and painful. I spent the next 3 days in a fog of pain medication and daytime television. Sarah checked on me twice daily, bringing groceries and helping with basic tasks I couldn't manage one-handed. She'd taken vacation time from her job at the hospital, insisting that someone needed to monitor my recovery. My family's silence was deafening. No phone calls, no text messages, no flowers or get well cards. They were all off living their lives. Mom and Dad cruising the Caribbean, Kevin managing his landscaping cruise, Amanda celebrating her future brother-in-law's engagement in Seattle. I tried to tell myself they were just busy, that they'd reach out when they returned from their various commitments. But deep down, I was beginning to understand that their absence wasn't about timing or logistics. It was about priorities, and I simply wasn't one of theirs. The pathology results came back on Friday afternoon. Dr. Chin called personally, which immediately set my anxiety spiking. Rachel, I have your results. Can you come in Monday morning to discuss them? I'd prefer to go over everything in person. Just tell me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Are the lymph nodes positive? A pause that lasted forever. Yes, 2 of the 3 sentinel nodes show microscopic melanoma cells. We need to talk about next steps. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto my kitchen counter. Stage 3 melanoma. Cancer in my lymph nodes. Everything I'd been trying not to think about for the past week had just become reality. I called Sarah immediately. She was at work, but stepped out of a patient room to take my call. The lymph nodes are positive, I said, and then I started crying so hard I couldn't speak. I'm coming over, she said without hesitation. I'll be there in 30 minutes. While I waited for Sarah, I sat on my couch staring at my phone. I needed to call my family, to tell them that my cancer had spread, that I was facing months of treatment with uncertain outcomes. But the memory of their dismissive reactions to my initial diagnosis made me hesitate. Finally, I sent a group text. Got pathology results. Cancer has spread to lymph nodes. Stage 3 melanoma. Will need aggressive treatment. The responses came sporadically over the next few hours. Kevin. Sorry to hear that. You're tough though. You'll beat it. Amanda. OMG. That's so scary. But you have great doctors, right? Everything will be fine. Mom didn't respond until the next day. Just saw your message. So sorry, sweetie. Dad and I are having such a wonderful time on the cruise. The weather has been perfect. We'll call when we get back. That last message broke something inside me. I just told them my cancer was spreading, and my mother's immediate response was to talk about cruise weather. The meeting with Dr. Chen on Monday was comprehensive and overwhelming. He'd assembled a full oncology team. Dr. Lisa Park, a medical oncologist who specialized in melanoma, Dr. James Rodriguez, a radiation oncologist, and Patricia Newman, a nurse practitioner who would coordinate my care. They explained that stage 3 melanoma with lymph node involvement required aggressive treatment. The standard protocol involved completion of lymph node dissection, removing all the lymph nodes in the affected area, followed by a year of immunotherapy with a drug called pembrolizumab. The completion of lymph node dissection is major surgery, Dr. Chen explained. We'll remove 15 to 20 lymph nodes from your left axilla, your armpit area. There are significant risks. permanent arm swelling called lymphedema, nerve damage, chronic pain, limited range of motion. Dr. Park took over the discussion of immunotherapy. Pembrolizumab is a checkpoint inhibitor that helps your immune system recognize and attack cancer cells. You'll receive intravenous infusions every 3 weeks for a full year. The side effects can be substantial: fatigue, joint pain, skin reactions, potentially serious immune-related complications affecting your lungs, liver, or other organs. The statistics were sobering. Without treatment, stage 3 melanoma had a 5-year survival rate of about 40%. With aggressive treatment, that number improved to approximately 70%. Still a coin flip, but better odds than doing nothing. Surgery was scheduled for April 8th, just 2 weeks away. The oncology team wanted to start immunotherapy as soon as I recovered from the lymph node dissection, ideally within 6 weeks of surgery. Walking out of that appointment, I felt like I was drowning. Major surgery followed by a year of challenging treatment, significant side effects, no guarantee of success. I was going to need help, lots of it, and I had no idea where it would come from. That evening, I made phone calls to each family member individually. I needed them to understand the severity of what I was facing, to grasp that this wasn't something I could handle alone. I called Dad first. He and Mom had returned from their cruise the day before, and I hoped a direct conversation might break through whatever barrier had been preventing them from taking my diagnosis seriously. "Hi, Dad, it's Rachel. I need to talk to you about my cancer situation." "Oh, hi, honey, how are you feeling? Your mom mentioned you had some kind of update." "Dad, my cancer has spread to my lymph nodes. I need major surgery in 2 weeks to remove more lymph nodes, and then I'll be on chemotherapy for a year. This is life-threatening." "Well, that does sound serious. But you're young and strong, and medicine has come so far these days. I'm sure you'll be fine." "I might not be fine, Dad. There's a 30% chance this treatment won't work. I'm gonna need help during recovery, and probably during treatment too. I can't drive myself to chemotherapy appointments or manage everything alone." "Of course, sweetheart, we'll figure something out. Actually, I should mention, your mom and I are thinking about taking another trip next month. We met this lovely couple on the cruise, the Johnsons, and they invited us to visit their place in Arizona. We're getting older, you know, and we want to travel while we still can." I sat in stunned silence. I just told my father I was facing life-threatening cancer treatment, and his response was to discuss vacation plans. "Dad, I need you and Mom to be available during my treatment. I can't do this alone." "Well, we'll see what we can do. Nothing's set in stone yet. Listen, your mom wants to tell you about the cruise. It was absolutely wonderful. Let me get her." Before I could protest, he'd handed the phone to Mom. "Rachel, the cruise was incredible. We had the most amazing food, and the shows were spectacular. You should really consider taking a cruise sometime. Very relaxing." "Mom, did Dad tell you what I said? About needing surgery and chemotherapy?" "Yes, he mentioned something about that. I'm sure everything will work out fine. You're such a strong person." "Oh, I have to show you the pictures from our trip. We took over 300 photos." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Mom describing every detail of their vacation, while completely ignoring the fact that her daughter was facing a year of cancer treatment. When I finally hung up, I felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. The call to Kevin went similarly. He was sympathetic in theory, but immediately started talking about how busy his business was getting as spring arrived. "This is my busiest season, you know. I can't really take time off right now, but I'm sure you understand." Amanda was marginally better, but still fundamentally dismissive. "I wish I could help more, but Mike and I are planning our wedding for next year, and we're just so busy with that. Plus, you know how squeamish I get around medical stuff. I'd probably just make you more stressed." By the end of those 3 phone calls, the pattern was clear. My family cared about me in the abstract, but when caring required any real sacrifice or inconvenience, they simply weren't available. Sarah was furious when I told her about the conversations. "Are you kidding me? They're all making excuses? Rachel, you need to stop protecting them. This is unacceptable." "Maybe I'm asking too much. I mean, they have their own lives and responsibilities." "Stop. Just stop. When someone in your family has cancer, you rearrange your life to help them. Period. That's what family means." Over the next 2 weeks, as I prepared for the lymph node dissection surgery, the contrast between my family's absence and Sarah's support became even more stark. Sarah researched post-surgical care, stocked my apartment with easy-to-prepare meals, arranged for a cleaning service to help during my recovery, and took another week off work to be available after the surgery. Meanwhile, my family continued their regularly scheduled programming. Mom and Dad finalized their Arizona trip. Kevin posted photos on social media of his crew working on elaborate landscaping projects. Amanda shared engagement party pictures and wedding planning updates. The lymph node dissection surgery was scheduled for 7 a.m. on April 8th. The night before, I received a group text from Amanda. "Good luck tomorrow. Thinking of you. 2 hearts." That was it. No offers to be there, no questions about what I needed, no acknowledgement that this was major surgery with significant risks. I turned off my phone and tried to sleep, knowing that Sarah would be there in the morning, and that might be enough. It had to be enough, because it was all I had. The surgery took 3 hours instead of the predicted 2. Dr. Chen had to remove 23 lymph nodes instead of the usual 15 to 20, because several showed signs of possible cancer involvement. When I woke up in recovery, my entire left side felt like it had been hit by a truck. This time, the post-surgical pain was exponentially worse. The lymph node dissection had involved cutting through multiple layers of muscle and tissue, disrupting the lymphatic drainage system in my arm. Within hours, my left arm began swelling noticeably. Lymphedema, Dr. Chen explained during his post-surgical visit. It's one of the risks we discussed. The swelling may be temporary, or it could be permanent. We'll monitor it closely and get you started with a lymphatic drainage specialist. The pathology results from the lymph node dissection came back 4 days later. Of the 23 nodes removed, 6 contained cancer cells. My oncologist, Dr. Park, explained that this was actually worse than the initial sentinel node biopsy had suggested. 6 positive nodes puts you in a higher risk category within stage 3, she said. We need to start pembrolizumab as soon as you're healed enough from surgery. I'd also like to discuss adding radiation therapy to the treatment plan. Radiation therapy. Another layer of treatment, another set of side effects, another few weeks of daily hospital visits. The cancer was dictating every aspect of my life, and I was only 3 weeks into what would be a year-long battle. During my recovery from the lymph node surgery, I received exactly 2 visits from family members. Kevin stopped by once, stayed for 15 minutes, and spent most of that time on his phone dealing with a work crisis. Amanda came over on a Saturday afternoon but left after an hour because she had dinner plans with Mike's family. Mom and Dad called twice during my 2-week recovery period. Both calls were brief, superficial, and focused mainly on updating me about their upcoming Arizona trip. Sarah, meanwhile, essentially moved into my guest room. She helped me shower, prepared my meals, drove me to medical appointments, and researched everything she could find about melanoma treatment. She took unpaid leave from her job and never once complained about the sacrifice. By early May, I was cleared to start immunotherapy. The pembrolizumab infusions would happen every 3 weeks at the OHSU Night Cancer Center. Each session took about 4 hours. Blood work, consultation with Dr. Park, the actual infusion, and post-treatment monitoring. The side effects started almost immediately. After the first infusion, I developed a skin rash across my chest and arms. The second infusion brought crushing fatigue that lasted for days. By the third treatment, I was experiencing joint pain so severe I could barely get out of bed some mornings. Dr. Park assured me these were expected side effects, signs that my immune system was being activated to fight the cancer. But knowing the cause didn't make the symptoms any easier to endure. The radiation therapy started in June, 5 days a week for 6 weeks. Every weekday morning, I'd drive to the hospital, lie on a table, while a massive machine delivered precisely targeted radiation to my left shoulder and armpit area. The treatments themselves were painless, but the cumulative effect was exhausting. By mid-July, I looked like someone fighting cancer. I'd lost 15 pounds, my skin was constantly irritated from radiation, and I moved like someone 20 years older. The lymphedema in my left arm had become permanent, requiring daily compression garments and regular massage therapy. Through all of this, my family's involvement remained minimal and sporadic. They'd check in occasionally via text message, usually with generic "how are you feeling" inquiries, that felt more like social obligations than genuine concern. The breaking point came in August, during my 7th pembrolizumab infusion. I was sitting in the cancer center's infusion suite, connected to an IV pole, watching the medication drip slowly into my port, when I got a group text from Amanda. "Family barbecue at Mom and Dad's this Sunday. Everyone's invited. Can't wait to see everyone." I stared at the message in disbelief. A family barbecue. The first family gathering since my diagnosis 5 months earlier, and I was finding out about it via group text 2 days before the event. I replied, "First I'm hearing about this. Am I actually invited? Or was this sent by mistake?" Amanda responded quickly, "Of course you're invited. Sorry. I thought Mom had already told you. We're celebrating Kevin's new contract for the Riverside Shopping Center project. It's a huge deal for his business. So the family was gathering to celebrate Kevin's business success, and my ongoing cancer treatment was apparently not worth mentioning. I'd been fighting for my life for 5 months, and they were throwing a party that I learned about through a group text. I decided to go, partly out of curiosity, and partly because I needed to see for myself how my family really viewed my situation. The barbecue was exactly what I expected. Kevin was the center of attention, describing his new commercial landscaping contract in detail. Mom and Dad shared stories and photos from their Arizona trip. Amanda showed off her engagement ring and discussed wedding venue options. I sat in a lawn chair, wearing a long-sleeved shirt to cover my radiation burns and compression sleeve, feeling like a ghost at my own family's gathering. For the first 2 hours, not one person asked about my treatment, my prognosis, or how I was coping. Finally, during a lull in conversation, Dad looked over at me and said, "So Rachel, how's the treatment going? You're looking good." I wasn't looking good. I was gaunt, exhausted, and obviously unwell. But this was the first direct question anyone had asked about my cancer in months. "It's been challenging," I said carefully. "The immunotherapy is working, but the side effects are pretty significant. I have 4 more months of treatment left." "Well, that's great that it's working," Mom chimed in. "See? We told you everything would be fine." "Modern medicine is just amazing," Kevin nodded. "Yeah, you're a fighter. I knew you'd beat this thing." The conversation immediately shifted back to Amanda's wedding planning. That was it. 30 seconds of acknowledgement for 5 months of cancer treatment. I left the barbecue early, claiming fatigue, which wasn't a lie. But I wasn't just physically tired. I was emotionally exhausted from pretending that my family's indifference didn't hurt. Driving home, I made a decision that would define the next phase of my life. I was going to stop expecting anything from my family. I would finish my treatment, focus on my recovery, and build my life around the people who actually showed up for me. I had no idea that within 6 months, I'd be testing that resolve in ways I never could have imagined. The summer of 2021 passed in a blur of medical appointments, treatment side effects, and gradual healing. By September, I was halfway through my pembrolizumab treatment, and the scans were showing promising results. No evidence of active cancer, no new tumors, good response to therapy. But something else was happening during those long months of treatment. I was paying attention to patterns I'd never noticed before. How my family communicated, what they prioritized, how they treated people who needed help. What I saw wasn't pretty, and it wasn't going to change just because I got better. The real test was coming, though I didn't know it yet. By October 2021, there were already lawyers making phone calls that would transform my cancer journey into something much more complicated than a medical crisis. The settlement that would tear my family apart was already in motion, and everything that happened next would prove that the people who ignore you during your darkest hours will always find you when there's money involved. October 15th, 2021, I was sitting in the infusion chair for my 9th pembrolizumab treatment when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Normally I'd let it go to voicemail during treatment, but something made me answer. "Ms. Martinez? This is Thomas Brennan from Brennan Walsh & Associates. I'm an attorney here in Portland, and I'd like to discuss a potential legal matter involving your melanoma diagnosis." I nearly dropped the phone. "I'm sorry, what? A legal matter?" Without going into details over the phone, we've been investigating certain practices at Pacific Northwest Dermatology Group. Your name came up in our research as someone who may have been affected. Would you be available to meet this week? Pacific Northwest Dermatology Group. I'd never heard of them, but something about the serious tone in the lawyer's voice made my stomach clench. "I think you have the wrong person. My dermatologist is Dr. Hoffman at Portland Dermatology Associates." "Actually, Ms. Martinez, that's exactly why I'm calling. Portland Dermatology Associates was acquired by Pacific Northwest Dermatology Group in January 2020. Dr. Hoffman became their employee at that time, though patients weren't always informed of the ownership change. The IV pump continued its steady rhythm, delivering medication into my port, while this stranger on the phone turned my world upside down once again. I still don't understand what this has to do with me. We believe there may have been systematic delays in patient care that affected diagnosis and treatment timelines. I'd really prefer to discuss this in person. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? I scheduled the meeting for Thursday at 2 p.m. after my radiation treatment. The rest of my infusion passed in a haze of confusion and growing anxiety. What systematic delays? What did this mean for my diagnosis and treatment? That evening, I called Sarah to tell her about the lawyer's call. She was immediately suspicious. "Rachel, this could be important." If there were delays in your diagnosis, that could have affected your prognosis. You need to find out exactly what happened. But I caught the melanoma relatively early, right? I mean, it was bad, but it could have been worse. Think about the timeline. You noticed the mole in late 2020, but you didn't see Dr. Hoffman until February. Then it took 3 weeks to get the biopsy results. That's a long time for melanoma. She was right. I'd been so focused on treatment that I'd never questioned whether the diagnostic process had been handled properly. The law office of Brennan Walsh and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a downtown Portland high-rise. Thomas Brennan turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his 50s with graying hair and the kind of intense focus that made you feel like nothing else in the world mattered except your conversation. Ms. Martinez, thank you for coming in. Before we begin, I want you to understand that everything we discuss today is confidential, and you're under no obligation to take any action based on what I tell you. He opened a thick file folder and spread several documents across his desk. Pacific Northwest Dermatology Group is a private equity-backed company that has been acquiring dermatology practices throughout the Pacific Northwest since 2019. Their business model focuses on maximizing revenue through high-volume patient processing and minimizing costs through reduced diagnostic testing. He showed me internal company emails that had been obtained through discovery in other cases. The content was shocking. Directives to reduce biopsy rates, pressure to see more patients per hour, financial incentives for doctors who avoided unnecessary procedures. Dr. Hoffman's practice was acquired in January 2020. Within 6 months, her patient volume had increased by 40%, and her biopsy rate had decreased by 25%. We believe this was the result of corporate pressure to prioritize profit over patient care. My hands were shaking as I processed what he was telling me. Are you saying my diagnosis was delayed? That's what we're trying to determine. I've obtained your complete medical records, and there are some concerning patterns. When you first called for an appointment in February, the earliest available slot was 3 weeks away. Before the acquisition, Dr. Hoffman's average wait time for new patients was 5 days. He pulled out a timeline he'd constructed from my medical records. You first noticed the mole in late 2020. If you'd been able to see Dr. Hoffman immediately when you called in February, your biopsy would have been performed 3 weeks earlier. If the diagnostic process had followed the pre-acquisition protocols, your surgery would have happened in early March instead of late March. But would that have made a difference in my outcome? Brennan's expression grew serious. Melanoma grows and spreads rapidly. Every week matters. Our medical experts believe that a 3-week delay in diagnosis could have been the difference between stage 2 and stage 3 melanoma in your case. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Stage 2 melanoma had a 5-year survival rate of around 90%. Stage 3 was 70%. If my diagnosis had been delayed due to corporate profit priorities, that delay might have literally cost me years of my life. There's more, Brennan continued. We've identified 43 other patients who experienced similar delays at practices owned by Pacific Northwest Dermatology Group. 7 of those patients died from melanomas that might have been caught earlier under previous diagnostic protocols. 7 people died. 43 lives affected. Also, a private equity company could squeeze more profit out of dermatology practices. What are you proposing? We're filing a class action lawsuit against Pacific Northwest Dermatology Group for systematic negligence and corporate malfeasance. Based on your case specifics, the delay in diagnosis, the progression to stage 3, the extensive treatment you've required, our damages experts estimate your individual claim could be worth between $4 and $8 million. The number was so large it felt abstract. $4 to $8 million. For delays that might have changed my entire medical outcome. I need to think about this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Of course. Take all the time you need. But I should mention that we're filing next week, and it would be beneficial to include your case in the initial filing if you decide to participate. I left the lawyer's office in a complete daze. The idea that my cancer progression might have been preventable was almost too much to process. For months, I'd been focused on fighting the disease and dealing with my family's indifference. Now I was learning that the whole trajectory might have been different if corporate greed hadn't interfered with medical care. That evening, I called Sarah to tell her about the meeting. Her reaction was immediate and furious. Those bastards. Rachel, you have to join this lawsuit. What they did is unconscionable. But what if I'm wrong? What if the delay didn't actually affect my outcome? What if it did? You've been through hell for the past 8 months. You've had major surgery, lymphedema, a year of immunotherapy, radiation treatments. If that was preventable, they need to be held accountable. Over the weekend, I researched Pacific Northwest Dermatology Group extensively. What I found was disturbing. The company had been acquired by Blackstone Capital Partners in 2018 with a stated goal of optimizing operational efficiency in dermatology practices. Translation: maximizing profits by cutting costs and rushing patient care. I found news articles about other medical practices that had been acquired by private equity firms. The pattern was always the same: longer wait times, shorter appointments, pressure on doctors to see more patients and order fewer tests. On Monday morning, I called Thomas Brennan and told him I wanted to join the lawsuit. "I'm glad to hear that, Ms. Martinez. We'll need you to sign some paperwork and provide additional medical records, but we can handle most of the process without requiring much time from you. What happens next?" "We will file the lawsuit next week. Discovery will take several months as we gather evidence and expert testimony. Pacific Northwest Dermatology Group will almost certainly try to settle rather than face a public trial that exposes their practices. Our experience with similar cases suggests this could be resolved within 12 to 18 months. 12 to 18 months. By the time this was over, I'd hopefully be finished with my cancer treatment and starting to rebuild my life. I decided not to tell my family about the lawsuit immediately. Given their complete lack of interest in my medical situation, I doubted they'd understand the legal complexities or the significance of what had happened. But Sarah was fascinated by every development. She helped me organize my medical records, research the lawyers and the private equity company, and provided the emotional support I needed to navigate this new challenge. The lawsuit was filed on October 28, 2021. The local news picked up the story immediately. Private equity company accused of prioritizing profits over cancer patients. Seeing my situation described in news articles was surreal and validating. For months, I'd felt like I was fighting this battle alone. Now there were 43 other people with similar stories, and we had legal representation. My family's reaction to the news coverage was predictably shallow. Kevin texted, "Saw the news story. That's crazy. Hope you get some money out of it." Amanda called, excited, "Oh my God, Rachel, you're gonna be rich. This is like winning the lottery." Mom's response was typical. "I always thought that the doctor seemed rushed during your appointment. I hope this doesn't interfere with your treatment." None of them grasped the real issue, that my cancer progression might have been preventable, that I'd suffered unnecessarily because of corporate greed. They saw potential money, not justice for medical negligence. November and December passed quietly. I continued my pembrolizumab treatments, finished radiation therapy, and slowly began to feel stronger. The lawsuit moved through preliminary stages: motions, discovery requests, expert witness depositions. In January 2022, exactly 1 year after my diagnosis, I received the best possible news. My latest scans showed no evidence of disease. The treatment had worked. I was officially in remission. Dr. Park explained that I'd need ongoing monitoring. Scans every 3 months for the first year, then every 6 months. But the immediate crisis was over. That same week, Thomas Brennan called with an update on the lawsuit. Pacific Northwest Dermatology Group has approached us about settlement discussions. They're clearly worried about the publicity and the strength of our evidence. Are you interested in hearing their initial offer? How early are we talking? Very initial. They've proposed a total settlement fund of $180 million for all 43 plaintiffs. Your individual share would be approximately $6.2 million before legal fees. $6.2 million. The number was staggering, life-changing, impossible to fully comprehend. What do you think I should do? It's a strong offer, but I think we can do better. My recommendation is to reject this initial proposal and continue negotiations. These companies always lowball their first offer. Over the next 3 months, as the legal negotiations continued, something interesting happened with my family. Suddenly, people who had been too busy to visit during my cancer treatment were calling regularly to check in and see how I was doing. Kevin started dropping by my apartment unannounced, usually with some transparent excuse about being in the neighborhood. Amanda began including me in family group texts about upcoming events and holidays. Mom and Dad started making comments about how they'd always known I was strong enough to beat cancer. The change in their behavior was so obvious it would have been funny if it weren't so insulting. For over a year, I'd been essentially invisible to them. Now that there were news stories about a potential large settlement, I was suddenly worth their attention. In April 2022, Thomas Brennan called with news that would change everything. They've made their final offer. $240 million total, with your individual share coming to approximately $8.1 million after legal fees. $8.1 million. More money than I'd ever imagined having. Compensation for medical negligence that had nearly cost me my life. The other plaintiffs have all agreed to accept. The decision is yours, but I strongly recommend taking this settlement. If we go to trial, we could potentially get more, but we could also get less or nothing at all. I told him I needed the weekend to think about it, but I already knew my answer. This wasn't really about the money. It was about accountability and justice. Pacific Northwest Dermatology Group would pay a substantial penalty for prioritizing profits over patient care, and hopefully that would prevent other people from experiencing what I'd gone through. On Monday, I called Brennan and accepted the settlement. The paperwork took another month to finalize, but by June 2022, the money was scheduled to be transferred to my account. $8.1 million for medical negligence that had changed the entire trajectory of my life. As the settlement date approached, my family's behavior became increasingly transparent. Kevin mentioned several times that his landscaping business could really use some investment capital. Amanda started talking about how expensive weddings were getting and how stressed she was about finances. Mom and Dad began dropping hints about their retirement plans and how they'd always dreamed of buying a vacation home. None of them directly asked for money, but the implications were clear. They expected me to share my settlement with them, despite their complete absence during the most difficult year of my life. The final settlement papers were signed on June 15, 2022. That evening, I sat in my apartment, looking at a bank statement that showed a balance of $8,127,000. After 18 months of cancer, surgery, treatment, and legal proceedings, I was officially a millionaire. I was also completely clear about what I was going to do with the money, and my family wasn't going to like it. The confrontation that would end my relationship with them forever was just days away. June 18, 2022. 3 days after the settlement money hit my account, Mom called with an invitation that would have been laughable if it weren't so predictable. Rachel, honey, your father and I want to take the whole family out to dinner this weekend to celebrate your recovery. We've made reservations at Le Bernardin for Saturday night. Our treat, of course, Le Bernardin, the most expensive restaurant in Portland, where dinner for 6 would easily cost $800. Mom and Dad, who had spent my entire cancer treatment prioritizing their vacation schedules, suddenly wanted to celebrate my recovery at a restaurant they'd never been able to afford before. The timing wasn't coincidental. News of the settlement had been covered extensively in local media. While the individual amounts weren't disclosed, everyone knew it was substantial. My family had clearly done the math. That's very thoughtful, Mom, but I already have plans for Saturday night. Oh, well, we can do Sunday instead. Or any night that works for you, really. We're just so proud of you and everything you've accomplished, everything I'd accomplished. As if beating cancer had been some kind of personal achievement rather than a year-long nightmare they'd essentially ignored. Let me think about it and get back to you. Of course, sweetheart. Take your time. Oh, and your father and I have been talking. We'd love to have you over for dinner soon so we can really catch up. We feel like we haven't seen nearly enough of you lately. The irony was breathtaking. For 18 months, I'd been available every single day. I'd been sitting in hospitals, recovering from surgeries, enduring chemotherapy, and dealing with side effects that left me housebound for weeks at a time. They hadn't seen enough of me because they hadn't bothered to look. After hanging up, I called Sarah to tell her about the invitation. Are you seriously considering going? She asked. Part of me is curious to see how far they'll take this charade. But mostly I think it's time to have a conversation about where we all stand. What kind of conversation? The kind where I tell them exactly what I think about their behavior over the past year and a half. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Rachel, are you sure you want to do that? Once you say certain things, you can't say them. Good. Some things need to be said, and some relationships need to end. I'd been thinking about this conversation for months, long before the settlement money arrived. The financial windfall had simply crystallized what I already knew. My family's priorities would never align with mine, and their capacity for genuine care and support was essentially non-existent. On Thursday, Kevin called. His approach was more direct than Mom's subtle maneuvering. Gimme. Hey sis, congratulations on the settlement. That's incredible news. Thanks. Listen, I was wondering if you might be interested in becoming a silent partner in my business. I've got opportunities to expand into commercial real estate development, but I need some additional capital. It would be a great investment for you, and it would really help me take the company to the next level. There it was. Kevin had never asked for my advice, opinion, or input on his business in the 15 years he'd been running it. But now that I had money, he suddenly valued my potential partnership. How much additional capital are we talking about? Well, ideally around $2 million would give us the flexibility to really make some moves. But even $500,000 would help enormously. $2 million. He was asking for a quarter of my settlement to invest in a landscaping business I'd never been consulted about before. That's a substantial amount, Kevin. I'd need to see detailed business plans, financial projections, legal documentation. Of course, I can put all that together. But you know you can trust me, right? I mean, we're family. Family. The word that was supposed to mean unconditional support, shared burdens, and mutual care. The word that had meant essentially nothing when I was fighting for my life. Let me think about it. Sure, but don't think too long. These development opportunities won't wait forever, and I'd hate for you to miss out on a great investment. Friday brought a call from Amanda, whose approach fell somewhere between Mom's subtlety and Kevin's directness. Rachel, I'm so happy about your settlement. You deserve every penny after everything you've been through. Amanda was the first family member to acknowledge that I'd actually been through something difficult, which was progress of sorts. Mike and I have been talking, and we realize we've been so caught up in wedding planning that we haven't been as supportive as we should have been during your treatment. We feel terrible about that. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd received from anyone in my family, though it conveniently ignored the fact that their wedding planning had been irrelevant to their availability during my crisis. We want to make it up to you. We're planning a destination wedding in Tuscany next spring, and we'd love for you to be there. Actually, we were hoping you might consider contributing to the wedding fund. I know it's a lot to ask, but having the whole family together in Italy would mean everything to us. And there it was. Amanda's version of making up for her absence during my cancer treatment was asking me to pay for her Italian wedding. How much are we talking about? Well, the venue and catering for 50 people is about 40,000 euros, and then there's travel and accommodations for the immediate family. Maybe 150,000 total? I know it sounds like a lot, but it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. $150,000 for a wedding. More than most people made in 3 years, being requested as casually as if she were asking me to pick up coffee. Amanda, that's an enormous amount of money. But think about the memories we'd create. And honestly, Rachel, what else are you going to do with all that money? You can't possibly spend $8 million on yourself. What else was I going to do with the money? I could think of several things. Establishing a cancer research foundation, creating a support fund for cancer patients without family support, investing in early detection programs, funding medical research into melanoma prevention. But apparently Amanda couldn't imagine any use for money beyond funding her fantasy wedding. Let me think about it, I said, using the same phrase I'd given Kevin and Mom. Saturday evening, I made a decision. Instead of continuing to deflect their individual requests, I would gather the whole family together and address everything at once. I called Mom back and accepted her dinner invitation, with one modification. Actually, Mom, instead of going out, why don't I host dinner at my place Sunday evening? I'll cook, and we can have a real family conversation. Oh, that's a wonderful idea. We'll bring wine. This will be so nice. Just like old times. Just like old times. Except the old times had never included a family dinner where one person had just survived cancer and received a multi-million-dollar settlement for medical malpractice. Sunday afternoon, I spent hours preparing dinner. Not because I wanted to impress them, but because I wanted to control the environment for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. I made Mom's favorite lasagna, Dad's preferred Caesar salad, and Kevin's go-to garlic bread. If this was going to be the last family dinner we ever shared, I wanted it to be memorable. They arrived at 6 p.m. sharp, all of them dressed more formally than usual. Kevin brought an expensive bottle of wine he'd clearly purchased specifically for the occasion. Amanda came with a bouquet of flowers and a card celebrating my strength and recovery. Mom and Dad brought a gift bag containing what turned out to be a framed photo of the whole family from Christmas 2019, before my diagnosis, before I learned who they really were. Dinner conversation was artificially cheerful and carefully superficial. Kevin talked about his business prospects. Amanda shared wedding planning updates. Mom and Dad described their latest travel ideas. Everyone complimented the food extensively and made comments about how good it was to have the family together again. The elephant in the room, my settlement money and their obvious interest in it, remained unaddressed through appetizers, salad, and the main course. But I could see it in their eyes, hear it in the pauses between topics, feel it in the unusual attention they were paying to every word I said. Finally, as I served dessert, Dad cleared his throat with the particular gravitas he reserved for important family moments. Rachel, we want you to know how proud we are of you. The way you handled your illness, the strength you showed throughout treatment, your recovery. It's been inspirational. Inspirational. My cancer had been inspirational to them. More than that, Mom added. We're proud of how you stood up for yourself with this lawsuit. What that company did was terrible, and they deserve to pay for it. They were building up to something, and I decided to let them get there in their own time. The settlement must feel overwhelming, Amanda said carefully. That much money comes with a lot of responsibility. It does, I agreed. Kevin leaned forward slightly. The thing is, money like that, it's more than any one person could ever spend on themselves. It's an opportunity to really make a difference for the people you care about. What kind of difference did you have in mind, Kevin? He exchanged glances with the others, and I realized they'd coordinated this conversation in advance. Well, we've all been thinking about how the family could work together to make the most of this opportunity. Dad and Mom are getting older, and their retirement savings aren't really enough for the kind of security they deserve. Amanda and Mike are starting their lives together, and a wedding is such an important foundation for a marriage. My business has real growth potential that could benefit everyone. It was masterfully orchestrated. They'd framed their individual requests as family initiatives, and positioned my money as a resource that belonged to all of us, rather than compensation for medical negligence I'd suffered alone. You're saying you think I should share the settlement with everyone? Not exactly shared, Mom said quickly. More like investing in the family's future. We've always supported each other, and this is just a chance to do that on a larger scale. We always supported each other. The revisionist history was breathtaking. When exactly did we always support each other? I asked quietly. The question seemed to catch them off guard. What do you mean? Dad asked. I mean, when have you supported me, specifically? Rachel, that's not fair, Amanda said. We've always been there for you. When? The silence stretched uncomfortably. When I called to tell you about my cancer diagnosis, Mom, what did you say? I was concerned, of course. You were meeting with a travel agent about your cruise. You told me modern medicine could fix skin cancer and said you'd call me back later. You never did. Mom's face flushed. I was processing the news. People handle shocking information differently. Dad, when I told you my cancer had spread to my lymph nodes and I needed major surgery, what was your response? Dad shifted uncomfortably. I said you were strong and would get through it. You said I'd be fine because I was young. Then you told me about your plans to visit Arizona. You asked if I needed help, and when I said yes, you said you'd see what you could do, because nothing was set in stone yet. We were trying to stay positive, he said defensively. Kevin, the day before my lymph node dissection surgery, did you offer to be there? It was my busy season. Amanda, during my 18 months of treatment, how many times did you visit? I was planning a wedding, and you know I don't handle medical stuff well. Once. You visited once. For an hour, and left early for dinner plans. The room had gone completely silent. Everything I'd been thinking for over a year was finally being said out loud. For 18 months, I fought cancer essentially alone. I had major surgery twice. I endured a year of immunotherapy that made me sick for days after every treatment. I developed permanent lymphedema. I lost 20 pounds and most of my energy. I was scared, exhausted, and in pain for over a year. My voice was steady but gaining intensity. During that entire time, exactly one person showed up for me consistently. Sarah took time off work, helped me with basic daily tasks, drove me to appointments, researched my condition, and provided emotional support when I thought I might die. She did what family is supposed to do. Rachel, we cared, Mom said weakly. We just didn't know how to help. You didn't try to know how to help. You didn't ask what I needed. You didn't rearrange your schedules or sacrifice your conveniences. You sent occasional text messages and made superficial phone calls, and you convinced yourselves that was enough. That's not entirely fair, Kevin said. We all have our own lives and responsibilities. Yes, you do. And now I have mine. For the past 3 days, each of you has contacted me about sharing my settlement money. Kevin wants $2 million for his business. Amanda wants $150,000 for her wedding. Mom and Dad want financial security for retirement. Suddenly, I'm very interested in all of you. The accusations hung in the air like a toxic cloud. But here's what you don't understand, I continued. This isn't lottery money or an inheritance. This is compensation for medical negligence that nearly killed me. Every dollar represents suffering that might have been prevented if corporate greed hadn't interfered with my medical care. We understand that, Amanda said quietly. No, you don't. Because if you understood that, you'd never ask me to spend it on a destination wedding or a business investment or travel plans. You'd understand that this money comes from the worst experience of my life, and that the people who weren't there during that experience have no claim to benefit from it. The silence was deafening. So here's what's going to happen, I said, standing up from the table. I'm not investing in Kevin's business. I'm not paying for Amanda's wedding. I'm not funding anyone's retirement or travel plans or any other family expenses. Rachel, Dad started. I'm not finished. This settlement is going toward cancer research, patient support programs, and medical advocacy organizations. Every penny will go toward helping people who are facing what I faced, hopefully with better family support than I had. You can't be serious, Kevin said, his voice rising. We're your family. No, I said firmly. Family shows up during a crisis. Family provides support when you're scared and sick. Family sacrifices convenience for each other's welfare. You are people who shared my DNA and ignored me during the worst period of my life, then showed up asking for money when I received compensation for medical malpractice. I walked to my front door and opened it. This dinner is over. Please leave. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Mom started crying. Dad began angrily muttering about ingratitude. Kevin accused me of being selfish, and Amanda tried to negotiate some middle ground. But I was done negotiating, done explaining, done pretending that their neglect during my cancer treatment could be overlooked or forgiven. They left that evening, and I haven't spoken to any of them since. Sen. The choice I made that night changed everything, but it didn't change anything. I regret. The silence in my apartment after my family left was profound. Not the uncomfortable silence of tension, but the peaceful quiet of a decision finally made. I sat on my couch, looking at the remnants of what would be our last family dinner together, and felt something I hadn't experienced in over 2 years. Complete clarity about my future. The next morning, I started making phone calls that would transform my settlement money into something meaningful. My first call was to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the Director of Melanoma Research at Oregon Health Sciences University. Dr. Rodriguez, my name is Rachel Martinez. I'm a melanoma survivor, and I'd like to discuss establishing a research fund focused on early detection and prevention. Ms. Martinez, I'd be very interested in that conversation. What kind of funding level are we discussing? $3 million to start, with the possibility of additional funding based on research outcomes. The pause on the other end of the line told me she wasn't expecting that number. That would be substantial. That level of funding could support multiple research initiatives. When would you like to meet? We scheduled an appointment for the following week. Over the next several days, I had similar conversations with the American Cancer Society, the Melanoma Research Foundation, and local organizations supporting cancer patients. Each conversation felt purposeful in a way that my family's dinner requests never had. This money would fund research that might prevent other people from facing delayed diagnoses. It would support patients who couldn't afford treatment or who lacked family support during their cancer journey. Sarah was amazed when I told her about my plans. Rachel, you're talking about giving away almost your entire settlement. Not giving away. Investing in something that matters. This money came from the worst experience of my life. The only way it makes sense is if it prevents other people from going through the same thing. What about your own future? You could invest this money, live comfortably for the rest of your life, and never worry about finances again. I'd thought about that, of course. $8 million, properly invested, would generate enough passive income to support a very comfortable lifestyle indefinitely. I could travel, buy a beautiful house, pursue any career or hobby that interested me. But every time I imagined that kind of life, it felt empty. The money represented 18 months of fear, pain, and family abandonment. Using it for personal comfort would feel like profiting from my own suffering. I'll keep enough to buy a house and maintain financial security, I told Sarah. But the rest needs to serve a purpose bigger than my personal comfort. The meeting with Dr. Rodriguez was everything I'd hoped for. She outlined 3 research projects that could benefit from significant funding: a study on genetic markers that predict melanoma development, research into immune system responses that could improve treatment outcomes, and a prevention program targeting high-risk populations. Your funding could accelerate these projects by years, she explained. Most medical research moves slowly because of limited financial resources. Private funding at this level allows researchers to pursue promising directions that might otherwise take decades to explore. I committed $3 million to melanoma research that day, with the understanding that I'd be updated regularly on progress and outcomes. My next major decision involved patient support. During my treatment, I'd met dozens of cancer patients who were struggling not just with their disease, but with financial hardship, lack of family support, and inadequate access to care. I established the Rachel Martinez Cancer Support Foundation with an initial endowment of $2 million. The foundation would provide direct financial assistance to cancer patients for treatment costs, transportation, housing during treatment, and family support services. The foundation's first initiative was a program I called Medical Advocate Services. Cancer patients without strong family support could access professional advocates who would attend medical appointments, help navigate insurance complications, coordinate care between specialists, and provide emotional support during treatment. It was everything I'd wished for during my own cancer journey, now available to people facing similar circumstances. But the most personally satisfying use of my settlement money was a project that grew directly from my own experience with family abandonment. I partnered with a local nonprofit to create chosen family support groups, ongoing support networks for people dealing with serious illnesses whose biological families were absent or unsupportive. The groups would meet weekly, provide practical assistance, and create the kind of community bonds that many people assume they'll get from family but don't always receive. Sarah became the program's first volunteer coordinator, using her medical background to help structure support that was both emotionally and practically effective. "This is incredible, Rachel," she said during one of our planning meetings. "You're creating the support system you needed and making it available to everyone." By October 2022, 6 months after my family dinner confrontation, my new life had taken definite shape. I'd moved into a beautiful house in the Portland Hills, kept enough money invested to ensure long-term financial security, and committed over $6 million to cancer-related causes. I'd also changed careers. Working for a tech startup felt meaningless after everything I'd been through. Instead, I became the full-time executive director of my own foundation, focusing entirely on cancer patient advocacy and support. The work was challenging but deeply fulfilling. Every day brought opportunities to help people facing circumstances similar to what I'd experienced. The foundation's medical advocate program was serving over 100 patients. The research grants were producing promising early results. The chosen family support groups had expanded to 3 different locations. But the most unexpected development in my new life was the response from my biological family. At first, there was silence. Complete radio silence for 3 months after our final dinner. No phone calls, no text messages, no attempts at reconciliation or conversation. Then, in September, the attacks began. Kevin posted a long Facebook rant about ungrateful family members who think money makes them better than everyone else. He didn't mention my name, but the details made it clear who he was talking about. Amanda shared passive-aggressive posts about people who abandon their families and how money changes people. She included photos from family gatherings I wasn't invited to, with captions about the family members who matter. Mom and Dad took a different approach. They began telling extended family members and family friends that I'd become cold and selfish after my settlement, that I'd refused to help family members in need, and that they were heartbroken by my ingratitude. The smear campaign was breathtaking in its dishonesty. They painted themselves as loving family members who'd been rejected by an ungrateful daughter. They completely omitted their absence during my cancer treatment and their transparent money grabbing after my settlement. Some extended family members believed their version of events. A few cousins and family friends unfriended me on social media or made comments about how money had changed me. But others weren't buying it. My Aunt Linda, Mom's younger sister, called me directly in October. "Rachel, I don't know what happened between you and your parents, but I want you to know that some of us remember how absent they were during your cancer treatment. Linda Morrison saw your mom at the country club 3 days after your surgery, complaining about how worried she was but making no effort to actually help you. I appreciate you telling me that. Your parents are telling people you cut them off because you're selfish with money, but that doesn't sound like the person I know. What really happened?" I gave Linda an abbreviated version of the settlement dinner and their requests for money, without going into detail about their absence during my treatment. So they asked you to share your settlement money, and when you said no, they're claiming you abandoned the family? Essentially, yes. That's appalling. Rachel, that money came from medical malpractice that nearly killed you. The idea that they'd expect you to share it for their personal expenses is disgusting. More conversations like that happened over the following months. People who'd witnessed my family's behavior during my cancer treatment weren't fooled by their revisionist narrative. But the smear campaign taught me something valuable. I'd made the right decision. People who would lie about our history and manipulate family members to make themselves look better were exactly the kind of people I didn't want in my life. By early 2023, my foundation work had expanded beyond Oregon. We were funding research at universities across the country, providing patient support in 12 states, and building a national network of chosen family support groups. The Medical Advocate Program has helped over 500 cancer patients navigate treatment. 3 of our research initiatives had produced publishable results. The chosen family support groups had created lasting communities for people who'd been abandoned by their biological families during medical crises. I was invited to speak at medical conferences about patient advocacy and the importance of family support during cancer treatment. My story resonated with healthcare providers who'd seen too many patients struggle alone through serious illnesses. During one conference presentation in Chicago, a doctor approached me afterward with tears in her eyes. "Ms. Martinez, your presentation perfectly captured something I see constantly in my practice. Patients with strong family support consistently have better outcomes than those facing treatment alone. But we don't have systems in place to provide that support when families fail to show up. That's exactly why the Medical Advocate Program exists," I told her. "Professional support can't replace genuine family care, but it can fill the gap when family care isn't available. How can we bring your program to Chicago?" That conversation led to our first major expansion outside Oregon. By the end of 2023, the Rachel Martinez Cancer Support Foundation was operating in 8 states, with plans for national expansion. The personal satisfaction of this work was immense, but so was the growing evidence that it was making a real difference. Research funded by our grants was leading to earlier detection methods. Patients in our advocate program were reporting better treatment outcomes and higher satisfaction with their care. The chosen family support groups were creating lasting friendships and community connections. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came in December 2023, nearly 3 years after my initial diagnosis. I was visiting one of our chosen family support groups in Portland when a woman named Jennifer approached me after the meeting. "Rachel, I want to thank you for creating this program. I was diagnosed with breast cancer 8 months ago, and my family essentially disappeared. They were too uncomfortable with cancer to provide any real support. I'm sorry you went through that. It's unfortunately more common than people realize. This group saved my life. Not medically, the doctors did that, but emotionally and practically, I couldn't have gotten through treatment without the people I met here. They drove me to appointments, helped with grocery shopping, sat with me during chemotherapy, celebrated with me when I finished treatment." She paused, clearly emotional. "You created the family I needed when my biological family failed me. That's not something I'll ever forget." That conversation crystallized everything I'd learned over the past 3 years. Blood relationships don't automatically create caring, supportive families. Real family, the kind that shows up during a crisis, provides practical help, and offers unconditional emotional support, is something that has to be built intentionally. I'd lost my biological family, but I'd gained something much more valuable: a chosen family of people committed to supporting each other through life's most difficult challenges. On the 3rd anniversary of my melanoma diagnosis, March 15, 2024, I hosted a dinner party at my house. But instead of biological family members who'd proven unreliable, I invited the people who'd actually supported me through my cancer journey and beyond. Sarah, of course, who'd been there from the very beginning. Dr. Rodriguez, whose research was already producing promising results. Patricia Newman, the nurse practitioner who'd coordinated my care. Jennifer, and 12 other members of our chosen family support groups. Staff members from the foundation, who'd helped build something meaningful from my settlement money. We gathered around the same dining room table, where I'd confronted my biological family 2 years earlier, but the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of superficial conversation hiding manipulative motives, we shared genuine connections, built on mutual support and shared purpose. During dinner, Sarah raised her wine glass for a toast. 3 years ago, Rachel faced the worst crisis of her life, with essentially no family support. Today, she's surrounded by people who truly care about her. And she's created support systems that are helping hundreds of other people facing similar circumstances. This is what a real family looks like. The contrast between that evening and my last dinner with my biological family was stark. Real relationships, I'd learned, aren't determined by genetics or legal obligations. They're built through consistent care, mutual support, and shared values. As I looked around the table at people who'd chosen to be part of my life and my mission, I realized something profound. I hadn't lost my family when I cut ties with my parents and siblings. I'd finally found my real family. The settlement money that had originally threatened to tear apart my biological relationships had instead funded the creation of a genuine community. My cancer diagnosis, traumatic as it was, had revealed the true character of the people around me and forced me to build a life based on authentic connections rather than assumed obligations. Today, I'm cancer-free, financially secure, and surrounded by people who've proven their loyalty through actions rather than words. The foundation continues expanding, helping more patients and funding research that will benefit future generations. My biological family occasionally attempts to reestablish contact, usually around holidays or when they're facing financial difficulties. But those overtures feel hollow and manipulative compared to the genuine relationships I've built with people who understand that family is something you create through consistent care and support. The $8.1 million settlement was compensation for medical negligence that nearly cost me my life. But in a strange way, I'm grateful for the whole experience. It forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my biological family, allowed me to build something meaningful from my suffering, and taught me that the family that matters most is the one you choose to create and maintain. 3 years later, I can honestly say that cutting my family out of my settlement and my life was the best decision I ever made. 5 years. That's how long it had been since I last spoke to my biological family, when the call came that would test everything I'd built and believed about moving forward. It was April 2027, a Tuesday morning, and I was in my foundation's new headquarters in downtown Portland, reviewing applications for our latest research grants. The Rachel Martinez Cancer Support Foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We were now operating in 22 states, had funded breakthrough research that led to 3 new early detection methods, and had helped over 8,000 cancer patients navigate their treatment journeys. My assistant, Maria Santos, knocked on my office door with an expression I'd learned to recognize, the one that meant something complicated was happening. "Rachel, I have your father on line 1. He says it's urgent and he needs to speak with you immediately." My stomach dropped. In 5 years, my biological family had made sporadic attempts to contact me. Birthday cards returned to sender, Christmas texts I'd ignored, LinkedIn connection requests I'd declined. But they'd never called the foundation directly, and they'd never claimed it was urgent. "Did he say something urgent?" "He mentioned something about your mother being in the hospital." My first instinct was to refuse the call. After years of their manipulation and lies, I had no reason to believe this wasn't another attempt to create drama that would force me back into their lives. But something about the word hospital made me hesitate. "Put him through." "Rachel?" Dad's voice sounded older, more fragile than I remembered. "Thank God you took my call. What's going on?" "It's your mother. She collapsed yesterday morning. We're at St. Vincent's Hospital. The doctors think it might be a stroke, but they're still running tests. She's been asking for you." "A stroke?" Mom was only 68, relatively young for a major stroke, though not impossibly so. And despite everything that had happened between us, the thought of her seriously ill brought up emotions I'd thought I'd resolved. "How serious is it?" "We don't know yet. She's conscious but confused. She keeps asking why you haven't visited, and we haven't told her about what happened between us. She thinks you've just been busy with work." Of course they hadn't told her. That would require admitting their role in our estrangement. "Dad, I need you to understand something. If this is real, if Mom is actually seriously ill, then I'm sorry that's happening. But if this is some kind of manipulation to get me to re-engage with the family..." "It's not manipulation," he said. And for the first time in years, he sounded genuinely sincere. "Rachel, whatever happened between us, whatever mistakes we made, your mother is dying. The doctors think she may have had multiple small strokes over the past few months that we didn't recognize. This is real." I closed my eyes and tried to process what I was feeling. Anger at the possibility of manipulation. Sadness at the thought of Mom being seriously ill. Frustration that I was being pulled back into family drama just when my life was exactly where I wanted it. "I'll come to the hospital," I said finally. "But I need you to understand that this doesn't change anything between us. I'm coming because Mom is sick, not because I'm ready to reconcile with the family." I understand. Thank you. St. Vincent's Hospital felt surreal. I'd spent so much time in hospitals during my own cancer treatment, but walking through those corridors as a visitor rather than a patient brought back memories I'd thought I'd processed. I found Dad in the neurological ICU waiting room, looking older and more worn than I'd expected. 5 years had aged him considerably. His hair was completely gray now, his face more lined, his posture somehow diminished. "Rachel," he said, standing when he saw me. "Thank you for coming. How is she?" "The neurologist says she's had at least 3 strokes over the past 6 months. Yesterday was the most severe, but there's been cumulative damage. Her speech is affected, and she's having trouble with memory and recognition." Kevin and Amanda were there too, sitting in uncomfortable hospital chairs and looking up at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Not hostile exactly, but not welcoming either. "Hey," Kevin said awkwardly. Amanda just nodded, her eyes red from crying. "Can I see her?" I asked. Dad led me to Mom's room. She was lying in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and oxygen, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Her eyes were open but unfocused, and when she saw me, her expression brightened with obvious confusion. "Rachel, sweetheart," she said, her words slightly slurred. "I was wondering when you'd visit. I haven't seen you in... How long has it been?" I looked at Dad, who shook his head slightly. They really hadn't told her about our estrangement. "Hi, Mom, how are you feeling?" "Tired. I'm very tired. The doctors keep asking me questions I can't remember the answers to." "When did you get here? Are you staying for dinner?" It was heartbreaking. Whatever cognitive damage the strokes had caused, Mom seemed to be existing in a time before our relationship fell apart. She was treating me like the daughter who used to come to Sunday dinners, not the one who'd cut contact after their money-grabbing behavior. I spent an hour in her room, mostly listening to her talk in fragments about memories from years past. She mentioned my college graduation, holidays from the 1990s, my childhood pets. But she couldn't remember what she'd had for breakfast or what year it was. When I came back to the waiting room, my siblings and father were clearly expecting some kind of statement from me. "The neurologist wants to speak with family members," Dad said. "Would you be willing to join that conversation? I'll listen to what the doctor has to say." Dr. Michael Chen, not the same Dr. Chen who'd performed my cancer surgery, but the name coincidence felt oddly familiar, was a soft-spoken neurologist in his 40s who explained Mom's condition with gentle clarity. "Mrs. Martinez has suffered multiple cerebrovascular accidents, strokes, over the past 6 months. The cumulative damage has affected her speech, memory, and cognitive processing. Yesterday's stroke was more severe and has caused additional impairment." "What's the prognosis?" Amanda asked. "Recovery from stroke is highly individual, but given the extent of the damage, we're looking at significant permanent impairment. She'll need extensive rehabilitation, and even with the best care, she's unlikely to return to independent living." "What kind of care are we talking about?" Kevin asked. "Initially, she'll need several weeks of inpatient rehabilitation. After that, she'll require either full-time home care or placement in a skilled nursing facility. Her insurance will cover some of the costs, but extended care can be expensive." There it was. The financial reality that would define Mom's future care and, inevitably, impact the family dynamics I'd walked away from 5 years earlier. After Dr. Chen left, we sat in the waiting room in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Dad spoke. "We need to make some decisions about her care." "What are the options?" I asked. "Home care would cost about $8,000 a month for round-the-clock assistance," Kevin said. "A good nursing facility costs around $6,000 monthly. Medicare covers some of it, but not everything." "Do Mom and Dad have long-term care insurance?" Amanda asked. Dad shook his head. "We never thought we'd need it. Our retirement savings are decent, but not enough for years of full-time care." I could see where this conversation was headed, and I felt the familiar surge of anger at being manipulated into family financial discussions. "So what are you proposing?" I asked directly. "Well," Kevin said carefully, "we were hoping the family could work together to ensure Mom gets the best possible care." "You mean you want me to pay for it?" The silence was enough. "Rachel," Amanda said, "I know things have been difficult between us, but this is about Mom's health, not about our relationship issues." "Everything is about our relationship issues," I said firmly. "Mom is sick, and that's genuinely sad. But 5 years ago, when I was sick, this family was nowhere to be found. Now you're asking me to fund Mom's care after years of treating me like I didn't exist. That's not fair," Dad said. "We made mistakes during your cancer treatment, But we're family. Family takes care of each other. No, I said, standing up. Families take care of each other during crises, not just when it's convenient or when there's no other option. You didn't take care of me when I needed it. You don't get to invoke family obligations now. But even as I said it, I was struggling with my own emotions. Mom's confused recognition of me, her obvious vulnerability, the reality that she was facing years of expensive care that could bankrupt my father, none of that was about the money grabbing that had ended our relationship. I need to think about this, I said. I'm not making any decisions right now. I left the hospital feeling emotionally drained and confused. For 5 years, I'd been certain that cutting off my biological family was the right choice. They'd proven themselves to be selfish, manipulative, and unreliable when I needed them most. But seeing Mom in that hospital bed, cognitively impaired and vulnerable, complicated my certainty. That evening, I called Sarah to talk through what I was feeling. This is incredibly difficult, she said after I'd explained the situation. Your mother is genuinely sick and needs care, but your family is also falling back into the same pattern of expecting you to solve their financial problems. But this is different, isn't it? Mom can't help being sick. No, she can't. But your family could have planned better for their retirement and potential health needs. And more importantly, they could have treated you better during your cancer, so that you'd feel emotionally connected enough to want to help them now. So you think I should refuse to help? I think you should do whatever feels right to you, not whatever your family expects or pressures you to do. What do you actually want to do? That was the question I'd been avoiding. What did I want to do? I spent the next week visiting Mom daily, watching her struggle with rehabilitation exercises, listening to her confused questions about why I hadn't been around lately. The cognitive damage was severe. She couldn't retain new information for more than a few minutes, and she often seemed to be living in memories from decades past. But she was still my mother, the woman who taught me to read, who'd bandaged my scraped knees, who'd been proud of my achievements, even if she hadn't been there when I needed support most. My siblings were clearly struggling with the financial reality of her care. Kevin's landscaping business was successful, but not hugely profitable. Amanda and Mike were dealing with a mortgage and student loans. Dad's retirement savings wouldn't last more than 2 years at $8,000 monthly. On Thursday of that week, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called a family meeting at the hospital and presented them with an offer. I'll fund Mom's care, I said. But there are conditions. The relief on their faces was immediate and obvious. First, I'm not giving you money to manage. I'll establish a medical care trust that pays for Mom's expenses directly. No one in this family gets access to the principal or has control over spending decisions. That's fine, Dad said quickly. Second, this arrangement doesn't mean we're reconciling or rebuilding family relationships. I'm doing this for Mom, not for any of you. Don't interpret this as forgiveness or an invitation back into my life. The hurt on Amanda's face was clear, but she nodded. Third, if any of you try to use Mom's situation to manipulate me into other financial arrangements or family obligations, the funding stops immediately. We understand, Kevin said. Finally, I want to be involved in decisions about Mom's care. Not because I'm paying for it, but because I'm her daughter and I care about her well-being. Over the next month, I established the Dorothy Martinez Medical Care Trust with an initial funding of $500,000, enough to cover several years of high-quality care regardless of what type of facility or home care arrangement worked best for Mom's needs. But something unexpected happened during the process of setting up Mom's care. Spending time with her, even in her cognitively impaired state, reminded me of positive aspects of our relationship that I'd forgotten during the anger and hurt of our estrangement. She couldn't remember our recent conflicts, but she remembered loving me. She couldn't retain new information, but she could still express affection and gratitude. She couldn't understand why I'd been absent, but she was consistently happy to see me. And gradually, carefully, I began having conversations with my father and siblings that went deeper than logistics and medical decisions. Dad, I said one afternoon while we were sitting in Mom's room, do you understand why I cut contact with the family 5 years ago? He was quiet for a long time. I think I'm beginning to understand. We weren't there for you when you needed us most. It wasn't just that you weren't there. It was that you actively chose other priorities. And then when I got the settlement money, suddenly I was interested in everyone again. You're right. I can see that now. At the time, I think we were scared and didn't know how to handle your cancer diagnosis. But that doesn't excuse our behavior. It wasn't a complete apology, but it was more acknowledgement than I'd ever received from him. Amanda was more direct when we finally had a one-on-one conversation. Rachel, I know I was selfish during your cancer treatment. I was so focused on my wedding and my own life that I didn't really understand what you were going through. I'm sorry. Amanda, you visited me once during 18 months of treatment. Once. And you left early for dinner plans. I know. I was uncomfortable with medical stuff, and I handled it terribly. I was immature and self-centered. What's changed? Seeing mom like this, I guess. And having kids of my own now. I understand better what it means to really need family support. Kevin's conversation was the most difficult, partly because he seemed least willing to acknowledge the full extent of their collective failure. Look, I know we weren't perfect during your cancer stuff, he said, but the family forgives each other and moves on. Kevin, forgiveness isn't automatic, and moving on doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. You asked me for $2 million 3 days after I told you about my settlement. You saw my cancer experience as a business opportunity. That's not how I meant it. Maybe not, but that's how it felt. And feelings matter when you're trying to rebuild relationships. These conversations didn't magically repair 5 years of estrangement, but they created a foundation for something different than what we'd had before. Not the close family relationships of my childhood, but perhaps a more honest and realistic connection based on actual understanding rather than assumed obligations. 6 months after Mom's stroke, we'd settled into a routine that worked surprisingly well. Mom was in an excellent assisted living facility that specialized in stroke recovery, where she was getting speech therapy, physical therapy, and cognitive rehabilitation. Her improvement was limited but meaningful. She could hold brief conversations and recognize family members consistently. I visited her twice a week, and gradually I began joining family gatherings again. Not the superficial holiday celebrations of the past, but smaller, more genuine interactions focused on Mom's well-being and our evolving relationships with each other. The foundation work that had defined my life for 5 years continued and expanded. We just opened a new research center focused on early cancer detection, and our patient advocacy program was being adopted by hospitals nationwide. The work remained deeply fulfilling and gave my life a sense of purpose that family relationships, however improved, couldn't provide. But something had shifted in my understanding of family and forgiveness. My biological family would never be the reliable, unconditionally supportive unit I'd once hoped they could be. But they weren't irredeemably terrible people either. They were flawed humans who'd made serious mistakes during a crisis and were now, slowly and imperfectly, learning to do better. The chosen family I'd built, Sarah, my foundation colleagues, the support group members who'd become close friends, remained the primary source of emotional support and meaningful connection in my life. That hadn't changed, but I'd learned that human relationships are more complex than the binary of family who showed up versus family who failed. People can grow, acknowledge mistakes, and build something better from broken foundations. 2 years after Mom's stroke, on the 7th anniversary of my melanoma diagnosis, I hosted another dinner party. This time, it included both my chosen family and my biological family, not because I'd forgotten the past, but because I'd learned to hold space for both forgiveness and boundaries, both healing and accountability. As I looked around the table that evening, I realized that the most important lesson from my cancer experience wasn't about family loyalty or financial priorities. It was about the difference between reactive decisions made from hurt and anger and intentional choices made from clarity and strength. Cutting off my biological family 5 years earlier had been the right decision at the time. It protected me from further manipulation and allowed me to build something meaningful from my settlement money. But maintaining that separation indefinitely wasn't serving my growth or well-being. The real victory wasn't in permanently punishing people who'd failed me. It was in creating a life so full of purpose, genuine relationships, and personal satisfaction that their approval or involvement was no longer necessary for my happiness. Today, my foundation has helped over 15,000 cancer patients, funded research that improves survival rates, and created support systems that prevent people from facing cancer alone. Mom is stable and as content as possible given her limitations. My relationships with Dad, Kevin, and Amanda are imperfect but honest. Most importantly, I've learned that strength isn't about building walls to keep hurtful people out. It's about building such a solid foundation of self-worth and genuine relationships that you can engage with imperfect people from a place of choice rather than need. The $8.1 million settlement gave me financial freedom, but the real treasure was learning to distinguish between people who deserve access to your heart and people who've only earned conditional engagement. Some relationships can be repaired with time and effort. Others are better left in the past. The wisdom is in knowing the difference. What I didn't anticipate was how my story would begin affecting other people's relationships with their own families. 3 months after the dinner party, that included both my chosen and biological families, I received an email that would change my perspective on the broader impact of sharing difficult family truths. The message came from Dr. Jennifer Walsh, an oncologist at Johns Hopkins who had attended one of my conference presentations about family support during cancer treatment. Ms. Martinez, your presentation 6 months ago about family abandonment during a medical crisis resonated deeply with my practice. I've since implemented screening questions about family support systems for all new cancer patients, and the results are shocking. Nearly 40% of my patients report inadequate or absent family support during their treatment. Would you be interested in collaborating on research about this phenomenon? This email launched what became a groundbreaking study on family dynamics during medical crises. Working with Dr. Walsh and researchers at 5 major cancer centers, we discovered that family abandonment during serious illness was far more common than anyone had realized. This study, published 2 years later in the Journal of Clinical Oncology, found that 38% of cancer patients experienced significant family withdrawal during treatment. More disturbing, patients with absent family support had measurably worse treatment outcomes, higher rates of treatment noncompliance, increased depression and anxiety, longer hospital stays, and reduced 5-year survival rates. But the research also revealed something hopeful. Patients who received structured support through programs like our medical advocate services showed outcomes comparable to those with strong family support. Professional advocacy and chosen family networks could effectively substitute for biological family failures. The publication of this research created a media storm that I wasn't prepared for. Suddenly, I was being interviewed by major news outlets, invited to speak at medical conferences worldwide, and approached by other cancer survivors with similar stories of family abandonment. One of the most powerful responses came from a woman named Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a surgeon in Miami, who read about our study in a medical journal. "Rachel," she said during our first phone conversation, "I need to tell you something. I abandoned my own sister during her breast cancer treatment 15 years ago. I was a resident, working insane hours, and I convinced myself that she had our parents for support. Reading your research made me realize that I was part of the problem you're trying to solve." Dr. Hernandez had reached out because she wanted to make amends with her sister, but also because she wanted to understand how medical professionals could better recognize and address family support gaps. "I see families in crisis every day in my practice," she continued. "I watch some families rally together beautifully, while others seem to crumble under the pressure. But I never thought systematically about how to help patients who don't have strong family support." This conversation led to another unexpected development: the creation of a medical education curriculum about family dynamics during health crises. Working with Dr. Hernandez in medical schools across the country, we developed training modules that taught healthcare providers how to assess family support systems and connect patients with alternative resources when family support was inadequate. The curriculum launched at 12 medical schools in 2029, and within a year, it was being adopted nationwide. Medical students were learning to recognize signs of family abandonment and to proactively offer resources like our medical advocate program. But perhaps the most personally meaningful development was the response from other cancer survivors who had experienced family abandonment. The foundation began receiving dozens of emails monthly from people sharing their own stories of family failure during medical crises. One letter from a man named Robert Chen in Seattle particularly moved me. "Ms. Martinez, I'm a stage 4 pancreatic cancer survivor, and reading about your experience gave me permission to acknowledge something I'd been denying. My family essentially disappeared during my treatment. My wife filed for divorce 3 months into chemotherapy, saying she couldn't handle the stress. My adult children visited twice in 18 months. I spent the worst period of my life essentially alone, and I blamed myself for not being strong enough to maintain those relationships. Your story helped me understand that some people simply can't rise to the occasion during a crisis, and that's about their limitations, not my worth as a person." These responses led to another expansion of the Foundation's work: support groups specifically for cancer survivors dealing with family estrangement. We called them Rebuilding After Abandonment groups, and they filled a need I hadn't fully recognized. Unlike our existing chosen family support groups, which focused on creating new relationships, these groups helped people process the grief and anger of losing family relationships during medical crises. Participants worked through complex emotions: anger at family members who disappeared, guilt about cutting contact, confusion about whether to attempt reconciliation. The groups were facilitated by licensed therapists who specialized in family trauma, and they followed a structured 12-week curriculum covering topics like grief processing, boundary setting, and making intentional decisions about relationship restoration. By 2030, we were operating these specialized support groups in 18 cities, and the impact was remarkable. Participants reported decreased depression and anxiety, improved self-esteem, and greater clarity about their relationships. Some chose to attempt reconciliation with family members. Others chose permanent separation. But all gained tools for making those decisions from a place of strength rather than reactive emotion. The success of these programs caught the attention of researchers studying family resilience, and we began collaborating on studies about post-crisis relationship recovery. The data showed that people who processed family abandonment in structured support environments were more likely to build healthy new relationships and less likely to repeat dysfunctional patterns in future family interactions. Meanwhile, my own family relationships continued evolving in unexpected ways. Mom's condition had stabilized at a level where she could participate in simple conversations and recognize family members, though her short-term memory remained severely impaired. But within those limitations, she expressed consistent love and gratitude that felt genuine and healing. Dad, now 75, had begun attending therapy to work through his guilt about the family's behavior during my cancer treatment. During one of our monthly coffee meetings, he shared something that surprised me. "Rachel, my therapist asked me to write a letter to you about my regrets from your cancer period. I want to read it to you, if you're willing to listen." I agreed, curious about what this exercise had produced. "Dear Rachel," he began, his voice shaky, "I need you to know that our absence during your cancer treatment was the biggest failure of my life as a father. You needed us most when you were facing the possibility of death, and we prioritized our comfort, our travel plans, and our fear of confronting illness. We turned you into an inconvenience when you should have been our highest priority. I can't undo that failure, but I want you to know that I understand the magnitude of what we did wrong. I'm proud of the person you've become, despite our failures, and I'm grateful that you've given us the opportunity to do better now. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope we can continue building something honest and caring from here. Love, Dad." The letter was more acknowledgement than I'd ever expected to receive. It didn't erase the past, but it created space for something different moving forward. Kevin's growth was more limited, but still meaningful. He'd never apologize as directly as Dad, but his actions showed change. When one of his landscaping crew members was diagnosed with cancer, Kevin gave him paid leave for treatment and organized the crew to help with yard work at the employee's house. It was a small gesture, but it showed he'd learned something about supporting people during medical crises. Amanda's evolution was perhaps the most significant. She'd enrolled in a social work master's program, specializing in medical social work, directly inspired by watching the gap between mom's needs and available support systems. "Rachel, I want to do the work you're doing," she told me during one of our increasingly frequent conversations. "Not because I'm trying to copy you, but because I understand now how important this support is. I was useless during your cancer because I didn't know how to be helpful. I want to learn how to actually help people during medical crises." She completed her degree in 2031 and was hired by the Regional Cancer Center to coordinate family support services. Her first project was implementing our medical advocate model in their patient care protocols. The professional collaboration with Amanda felt surreal, working together on programs that addressed the exact type of family failure she'd demonstrated during my illness. But it also felt redemptive. She couldn't change her past behavior, but she was dedicating her career to ensuring other families didn't repeat the same mistakes. By 2032, 11 years after my cancer diagnosis, the Rachel Martinez Cancer Support Foundation had grown into a national organization with a $15 million annual budget. We were operating in 35 states, had helped over 25,000 cancer patients, and had funded research that contributed to 3 breakthrough early detection technologies. But the foundation's expansion brought new challenges. Managing a large organization required different skills than building programs and supporting individual patients. I found myself spending more time on administrative tasks and less time on direct service delivery. Sarah, who had become the foundation's clinical director, suggested a solution that felt both exciting and terrifying. "Rachel, you've built something incredible here, but you're burning out on the administrative side. What if we hired an experienced nonprofit CEO to handle operations, and you focused entirely on program development and advocacy?" The idea of stepping back from day-to-day management was appealing, but it also meant giving up control over the organization I'd built from my settlement money. After months of careful consideration and consultation with the board of directors, we hired Margaret Thompson, a former hospital administrator with extensive experience in healthcare nonprofit management. Margaret took over operational leadership, while I transitioned to a new role as Chief Advocacy Officer. The change was liberating. Instead of reviewing budgets and managing staff, I was back to developing new programs, speaking at conferences, and working directly with patients and families. I started a podcast called When Family Fails that featured conversations with people who'd experienced family abandonment during medical crises and rebuilt their lives afterward. The podcast attracted a surprising audience, not just cancer patients, but people dealing with family estrangement from all kinds of circumstances. Episodes featuring conversations with my own family members were particularly popular, offering a rare look at how family relationships could evolve after serious damage. One episode, featuring a conversation between Amanda and me about her transformation from unsupportive sister to medical social worker, was downloaded over 100,000 times in its first month. The comment section was filled with people sharing their own stories of family members who had changed after initially failing them. But success brought unexpected complications. In late 2032, I received a letter from a law firm representing my Uncle Michael, Mom's older brother, whom I hadn't spoken to since childhood. The letter informed me that Uncle Michael was challenging the Dorothy Martinez Medical Care Trust, claiming that I had manipulated Mom during her cognitive impairment to gain control over family assets. He was seeking to have the trust dissolved and demanding an accounting of all funds spent on Mom's care. Dorothy. The accusation was both absurd and painful. Uncle Michael had been completely absent during Mom's stroke and recovery, showing no interest in her welfare until he learned about the trust structure. But the legal challenge forced me to confront an uncomfortable reality. Financial generosity, even with the best intentions, can create new forms of family conflict. The legal battle lasted 8 months and cost over $50,000 in attorney fees. Ultimately, the court found no evidence of manipulation or improper influence, and the trust remained intact. But the experience reinforced my understanding that money complicates family relationships in ways that good intentions can't prevent. Uncle Michael's challenge also prompted broader family discussions about inheritance and financial planning. Dad and I had several difficult conversations about his estate planning and how to structure things to prevent future conflicts among surviving family members. These conversations led to an unexpected development. Dad decided to donate a significant portion of his estate to the foundation rather than leaving everything to his children. It wasn't a large amount, maybe $200,000, but the gesture was meaningful. "I want to support the work you're doing," he explained. "And I want to avoid creating inheritance conflicts that could damage the relationships we've rebuilt." By 2033, as I approached the 12th anniversary of my melanoma diagnosis, I had achieved something I never expected when I first cut contact with my family. A life that was both independent of their approval and inclusive of their genuine participation. The foundation had become a model for other organizations supporting people through medical crises. The research we'd funded had contributed to earlier detection methods that were saving lives. The support programs had helped tens of thousands of people navigate cancer treatment with dignity and practical assistance. My family relationships were imperfect but honest. Mom remained cognitively limited but content and well cared for. Dad had genuinely worked to understand his failures and make different choices. Amanda had transformed her career and personal priorities. Kevin remained less insightful, but had learned to show up in practical ways. Most importantly, I had learned that healing doesn't require perfect resolution. Some damage can't be fully repaired, some trust can't be completely restored, and some relationships will never return to their original form. But growth is still possible within those limitations. People can acknowledge harm they've caused, make different choices going forward, and build something new from broken foundations. The cancer that nearly killed me had revealed the worst in my family relationships, but it had also created opportunities for the best. Not the superficial best of pretending problems didn't exist, but the genuine best of facing difficult truths and choosing to do better. Standing in my office on a Friday evening in December 2033, looking at thank you letters from patients our programs had helped, photos from foundation events, and research publications that cited our work, I felt something I'd never expected to feel. Complete peace with the choices I'd made. The settlement money was almost gone, invested in programs and research that would outlast any individual bank account. The family relationships were complicated but authentic. The work was meaningful and growing. Kinichanam. I had built exactly the life I wanted from the ashes of the worst experience I'd ever endured. And that felt like the most profound form of victory possible. But the story wasn't quite finished. In January 2034, 13 years after my diagnosis, I received a phone call that would bring everything full circle in a way I never could have anticipated. Ms. Martinez, this is Dr. Sarah Kim from the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations. I'm calling regarding Pacific Northwest Dermatology Group and the settlement you received in 2022. We've uncovered additional evidence that significantly expands the scope of their criminal activities. My stomach dropped. The lawsuit had been settled years ago, and I'd assumed that chapter of my life was completely closed. What kind of additional evidence? We've discovered that the diagnostic delays you experienced were part of a much larger scheme. Pacific Northwest Dermatology Group wasn't just pressuring doctors to reduce biopsies to cut costs. They were actively falsifying patient records to hide delays and misdiagnoses. We believe they may have caused preventable deaths in dozens of cases. The implications were staggering. What I'd experienced wasn't just corporate negligence. It was potentially criminal fraud that had killed people. What does this mean for me? We'd like you to testify before a federal grand jury about your experience. Your case was one of the first documented examples of their systematic fraud, and your testimony could be crucial in bringing criminal charges against the executives responsible. The prospect of reliving the entire diagnostic delay experience was exhausting to contemplate, but the possibility that my testimony could prevent other people from dying due to corporate fraud made the decision obvious. I'll testify. The grand jury proceedings took place over several months in 2034. I spent hours describing the timeline of my diagnosis, the delays I'd experienced, and the impact those delays had on my treatment and prognosis. But I also learned details about Pacific Northwest Dermatology Group's operations that were far worse than anything revealed during our civil lawsuit. The FBI investigation had uncovered internal company documents showing that executives knew their policies were causing diagnostic delays that could result in patient deaths. They had calculated that the money saved by reducing biopsies and rushing patient care would exceed any legal settlements from malpractice claims. In other words, they had literally decided that some patients' lives were worth sacrificing for profit margins. The investigation revealed that 47 patients had died from cancers that likely would have been caught earlier under previous diagnostic protocols. Hundreds more, like me, had received delayed diagnoses that worsened their prognoses and required more aggressive treatment. In September 2034, the grand jury issued criminal indictments against 12 Pacific Northwest Dermatology Group executives, including the CEO and chief medical officer. The charges included wire fraud, conspiracy, and criminally negligent homicide. The criminal trial began in March 2035, and I was called as one of the prosecution's key witnesses. Testifying in a criminal proceeding felt completely different from the civil lawsuit process. This wasn't about financial compensation. It was about justice for people who had died and accountability for executives who had prioritized profits over human lives. My testimony lasted 2 full days. I described my diagnostic timeline, the delays I'd experienced, and how those delays had affected my cancer staging and treatment requirements. But the prosecutors also asked me to describe the personal impact, the year of treatment, the permanent physical effects, the family relationships that had been damaged by the stress of fighting cancer alone. The defense attorneys tried to argue that my cancer would have progressed to stage 3 regardless of diagnostic timing, but our medical experts provided compelling evidence that a 3-week delay had likely been the difference between stage 2 and stage 3 melanoma in my case. More powerfully, the prosecution presented evidence from other patients whose cancers had been caught later due to the same systematic delays. Several family members of patients who had died testified about their loved ones' final months and the agonizing realization that earlier detection might have saved their lives. The trial lasted 4 months and generated extensive media coverage. Every day, I sat in the courtroom listening to evidence about corporate decisions that had treated human lives as acceptable losses in pursuit of profit maximization. On July 15, 2035, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all major charges. The CEO was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The chief medical officer received 8 years. Other executives received sentences ranging from 3 to 6 years. But perhaps more importantly, the trial resulted in new federal regulations requiring transparency in medical practice ownership and standardized protocols for diagnostic procedures. The Martinez standards, as they became known in medical circles, mandated specific timelines for biopsy scheduling and results reporting. The criminal convictions also triggered a new wave of civil lawsuits from families of patients who had died. Pacific Northwest Dermatology Group eventually paid over $800 million in total settlements and was forced into bankruptcy. Blackstone Capital Partners, the private equity firm that had owned Pacific Northwest Dermatology Group, faced congressional hearings about their role in incentivizing the deadly policies. While they avoided criminal liability, the publicity severely damaged their reputation and led to new regulations governing private equity ownership of healthcare practices. The trial and its aftermath consumed almost 2 years of my life, but it felt like necessary work. My individual settlement had compensated me for the harm I'd suffered, but the criminal proceedings held people accountable for causing preventable deaths and created systemic changes that would protect future patients. During this period, the foundation continued growing and evolving. Margaret Thompson had proven to be an excellent CEO, expanding our programs efficiently while maintaining the quality and mission focus that defined our work. By 2035, we were operating in all 50 states and had helped over 40,000 cancer patients navigate their treatment journeys. But the criminal trial had also given me a new perspective on advocacy work. Individual patient support remained crucial, but systemic change, regulations, legislation, corporate accountability was equally important for preventing the problems we were trying to solve. Working with policy advocates and congressional staff, I began focusing more attention on healthcare reform efforts. The foundation established a new advocacy division that worked to strengthen patient protection laws, improve insurance coverage for cancer treatment, and increase funding for cancer research. This work brought me into contact with other patient advocates who had transformed personal medical tragedies into broader social change efforts. I met families who had lost children to preventable medical errors and channeled their grief into patient safety initiatives. I worked with disability rights advocates who had faced discrimination during medical treatment and fought for stronger anti-discrimination protections. These collaborations taught me that my experience, cancer, family abandonment, corporate medical fraud, was part of larger patterns of systemic failure in how our society supports people during health crises. The foundation's individual patient services were important, but they were also addressing symptoms of problems that required political and regulatory solutions. By 2036, 15 years after my melanoma diagnosis, I had found a new sense of purpose that integrated everything I'd learned about patient advocacy, family dynamics, corporate accountability, and systemic reform. The foundation launched its most ambitious project yet, a comprehensive policy initiative aimed at reforming how healthcare is delivered, regulated, and financed in the United States. Working with medical professionals, patient advocates, policy experts, and legislators, we developed a framework for healthcare reform that prioritized patient outcomes over corporate profits. The initiative included proposals for strengthening oversight of medical practice acquisitions, mandating family support assessments for all serious medical diagnoses, expanding coverage for patient advocacy services, and creating stronger penalties for healthcare fraud. It was impossibly ambitious work that would take years or decades to achieve, but it felt like the natural evolution of everything I'd learned from my own experience and the thousands of patients our foundation had served. Standing in the foundation's new Washington, D.C. office in December 2036, looking out at the Capitol building where our policy proposals were being debated in committee hearings, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me to this moment. 15 years earlier, I had been a 34-year-old marketing manager, facing a cancer diagnosis with minimal family support. Today, I was leading a national organization that was changing how cancer patients received care and advocating for healthcare reforms that could benefit millions of people. The settlement money was long gone, invested in programs and research that had grown far beyond what any individual financial windfall could have achieved. The family relationships that had been shattered by crisis had been rebuilt into something more honest and sustainable than what existed before. Most importantly, the worst experience of my life had become the foundation for work that gave everyday meaning and purpose. I thought about Mom, now 81 and still living comfortably in her assisted living facility, unable to fully understand the scope of what her daughter had built, but expressing pride in whatever way her limited cognition allowed. I thought about Dad, who attended every foundation fundraising event and had become an unlikely advocate for improved family support during medical crises. I thought about Amanda, now supervising a team of medical social workers and implementing family support protocols at cancer centers across the Pacific Northwest. I thought about Kevin, still running his landscaping business, but volunteering monthly at our patient transport program, driving cancer patients to treatment appointments. I thought about Sarah, my foundation partner and closest friend, who had shown me what real family support looked like and helped me build something meaningful from tragedy. And I thought about the thousands of cancer patients who had received support through our programs, the families who had learned to show up for each other during the crisis, the researchers whose work we'd funded, the medical students learning to recognize and address family support gaps, the policymakers considering reforms that would strengthen patient protections. Every relationship, every program, every advocacy effort could be traced back to that phone call in March 2021 when I learned I had melanoma, and my family chose vacation plans over supporting their daughter through a life-threatening illness. The pain of that abandonment would never completely disappear, but it had been transformed into something powerful and purposeful that was helping people I would never meet face their own medical crises with dignity and support. That transformation, from victim to advocate, from abandoned daughter to chosen family builder, from individual tragedy to systemic change, felt like the most complete form of healing possible. The story that began with a cancer diagnosis and family abandonment had become a story about the possibility of building something beautiful from the worst experiences life can offer. And 15 years later, that story was still being written. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.